Hi, this is Mr. Chandler. This is the second part of the 1.2 video. So if you haven't already, please go and watch the first part of the 1.2 video. In the first part, we talked about the early foundations of representative government. And in this one, we're going to talk about how the American colonists really believe that that representative government is the one that should control them, which then will lead them to declare war through the Revolutionary War. So I said everything kind of changed with the French and Indian War. Prior to that, they've been doing something called salutary neglect, where they kind of let the colonies just rule themselves. With the French and Indian War, the British have to start getting involved. They have to start trying to crack down on smugglers so they can make more money, and they have to start enforcing some of the policies they hadn't before because, again, they're trying to make money. Now, the French and Indian War started because of a land dispute, and that land dispute is right about in here. You'll probably see a little bit better on the map that's on your screen. It's right over near like the whole Fort Duquesne. That's not really that important. What is important is that the British are going to have to start cracking down on the colonies more. And so the colonies are kind of used to running themselves, and now the British want to crack down on them more, start passing taxes, start trying to stop smuggling, and that's going to anger the colonists. One thing the British do that really upsets the colonists, is they start creating admiralty courts where there's no jury of their peers, which is a big violation of the Magna Carta, which you should remember. The colonists protested, and they ended up smuggling more because they were upset about that. One of the first big taxes that was put in place was the Stamp Act. It is very, very important for you to know the order of these and how these all kind of like fit together. That's a big part of it. You need a sequence of events, so really be paying attention to how it's going to play out from here. So Stamp Act. The cost of war is going to cause Parliament to have to change the way it deals with the colonies. The colonists are going to have to pay more taxes. Remember, the colonists believe that only their representative assemblies should be able to pass taxes. So when Parliament passes the Stamp Act, they're going to be upset about it. And they're also upset because it's a direct tax, meaning everyone has to pay it. So basically, the Stamp Act is any paper goods that were used in the colonies would have to have this stamp. You see the stamp on it. This is a mocking of the stamp that's actually on it. There would be a stamp like that on the documents, and that would make the colonists would then have to pay to get that stamp on any like paper. So it's really going to upset them because everybody's going to have to pay this tax. It's different than an indirect tax where it would just be a tax on like an imported good like sugar. Some reactions to the Stamp Act. They get really upset. That's where this whole phrase, taxation without representation, comes in. Parliament kind of fails to recognize the colonial legislators' exclusive right to collect taxes, and so the colonists are going to get upset. They're going to think that, I mean, they don't have any representatives in Parliament. They probably don't really want one either, so they're going to get upset because they don't have a say in these taxes, and they believe that every British citizen should have a say in any new taxes. And so you see there's a picture of one of the things that they did as a protest. They took some of the tax collectors and tar and feathered them. They also did other things like boycott. They didn't buy goods from the British. It's going to eventually cause the British to get rid of the Stamp Act. But still, the precedent has been set that the British believe that they can set taxes, while the colonists don't believe that the British should be able to set taxes over the American colonies. The Boston Massacre is another hugely important event. There are British troops stationed in Boston. There's a lot of tension between the British troops and the Bostonian citizens, and that's going to cause a lot of tension. And that's what's eventually going to lead to the Boston Massacre. What was basically happened was that the colonists were protesting, and they were taking and they were throwing rocks and oyster shells and snowballs and all kinds of stuff at the British soldiers. And eventually one of the British soldiers fired into the crowd, which caused the other British soldiers to fire into the crowd, and 5 colonists ended up being killed. The idea that it's a massacre is propaganda. I mean, think about it. How many people have to die for it to be called a massacre? Calling it a massacre makes the British sound like they're guilty. And then showing this picture of Paul Revere, like Paul Revere drew, like the one in front of you, it looks like the British kind of stood in a line and shot at the colonists, and that it was the British who were at fault, not the colonists. So this is going to anger a lot of the American citizens. It is propaganda, though. That's not really how it happened. This picture by Paul Revere is not an accurate portrayal. Then the British are going to pass what's called the Townshend Acts. And this is meant to raise revenue for the administration of the colonies. It's going to anger the colonists because they believe that their representative governments have the right to pass taxes, like the town meetings in Massachusetts or the House of Burgess in Virginia. Those should be able to pass taxes, not Parliament. What this is going to do is it's going to place tariffs on items that were not produced in the colonies, and it's be difficult to smuggle. Colonies end up working together to not pay the tariff. I mean, there were taxes on like paint, there were taxes on tea, there were taxes on all kinds of stuff. And it brings up bringing trade to Britain with a standstill. Well, then the British are going to get rid of the Townshend Acts. And then they're going to pass what's called the Tea Act. Tea Act is misunderstood. Tea Act is not a tax on tea. What it did was it actually took a tax off of tea from the East India Company. Tea would then be sold directly to the colonies cheaply. Though the tea would be cheaper, it does hurt colonial merchants that sold tea. So it's going to anger a lot of the colonists, specifically in Boston. And it's going to create a monopoly on tea from the East India Company. And they don't like that because the colonists that were merchants in Boston were the ones who were like importing the tea, and they were making money off of importing tea from other places. And so as a result, the Boston Tea Party happens. The Sons of Liberty board a ship carrying tea for the East India Company, and they dump the tea into the harbor. Excuse me. 342 chests of tea were dumped into the harbor, and it's replayed across the colonies. Not long after, the Intolerable Acts were passed. The Intolerable Acts were kind of they're a result of the Boston Tea Party when the British realized they had to kind of get Boston in line, because Boston's the one who's really, the Bostonian citizens are the ones who are really causing most of the trouble. They closed the Boston Harbor. They put up martial law in Boston, which means that they had troops stationed in Boston. They moved the trials of government officials accused of crimes of Britain. They put the Quartering Act in place, where you would have to house British soldiers in your house. They also passed the Quebec Act, which extended the boundaries of Quebec and Canada and gave British more control. Not long after the First Continental Congress met, they're not talking about independence yet. They're not. They wanted to right the wrongs that Britain had done. They wanted to return the American representative governments to being the ones who made decisions for themselves, not the British. And they want a unified voice in doing that. They're certainly not thinking of themselves as the United States of America yet. They're still colonies of Great Britain. Not long after, though, the first shots of the war happened. This happens in 1775, even prior to the Declaration of Independence. And this happens at Lexington and Concord. Basically, the British leave. They leave Boston to try to go seize an arsenal at Concord. And as they're going, they get to Lexington. They get into a small skirmish with the American Minutemen. These are the militia. They're called Minutemen because they should be able to get ready in a minute's notice. So these were just like citizen soldiers. It's kind of like what our National Guard is in a way. After they got through Lexington, they marched on to Concord, and they were faced with 3,000 to 4,000 Minutemen, and they were defeated. The British were defeated and humiliated. And it was called a glorious day for America. And this is the start of the War for Independence, the very first shot. And sometimes it's referred to as a shot heard around the world. And that concludes us to get into the Revolutionary War. Next, we'll actually talk about the Declaration of Independence, which happens after this battle, and we'll start talking about some of the foundations of American government, which are kind of set in this past unit. Thank you very much for watching. Please turn in your notes guide and also take the quiz. Thank you very much. And please also make sure you have one question ready to share in class and ready to ask in class. Thank you very much. Have a great day.